Hey guys, welcome to Amity Tracks. So we've done my favorite 25 guitar players. We've done my favorite 10 singers. My favorite 10 bass players. It's time for the drums. My top 10 drummers. Now, I sing occasionally. I play the guitar occasionally. I told you in my bass video, I'm not a bass player. I did own one once, but it was only for like simple recording, and I never really learned how to play it very well and sold it to a friend. But I've always been kind of a wannabe bass player, as I explained that in that video. I ain't a drummer. I am far from a drummer. I admire drummers an incredible amount because I do not have that skill. Ask any of my colleagues that I have played music with in the past, and how would they describe me? Maybe rhythmically challenged. And so to put me on a drum kit to keep a steady rhythm, that would be a bad idea. Anyway, but I admire the hell out of drummers, and I listen carefully to what drummers are doing when I'm listening to music. So these are my top 10 drummers. My favorite. These are not the most, although I mean many of these guys are incredibly skilled, but I'm not basing this on skill, much like the or skill alone, I should say. Much like with those other lists, my first criteria is just who do I really connect with? Whose playing do I really connect with? So these are the ten drummers. So I'll give you my top 10, then I'll give you some honorable mentions that almost made the list, and then of course in the comments, let's talk drummers. Tell me who you like and why, or even if you don't want to tell me why, just tell me who you like. Well, let's talk drummers, especially if you are a drummer. I would love to hear from actual drummers. Because again, I am not one. Okay. In my 10 slot, I have a guy who I guess is still pretty respected, although I don't see him showing up in a lot of people's top lists, but I don't know, maybe. But I really love the playing of Larry Mullen Jr. of U2. And, you a lot of times you've got to combine the drummer with the bass player if you're talking about kind of a unique rhythm section. Adam Clayton on bass and Larry Mullen Jr. on drums, I think make a really unique rhythm section that U2 has, that allows Bono and Edge to lay their stuff down on top of it. But a solid rhythm section I would take anywhere. What I like about Larry Mullen Jr.'s playing is, I mean, he can be a strong drummer on good rock tunes and do all kinds of stuff. But almost like the Edge on guitar, Mullen can be really atmospheric, like on the drums. He'll create these very interesting kind of atmospheric, soundscapes on the drums. I mean, like I said, as much as Edge does it with his effects on the guitar. So, how this works too is, like in the previous lists with the other instruments, I will pick a song that I think is kind of representative of what I'm talking about. And so when I'm talking about that atmospheric drumming, go to the opener on Unforgettable Fire, Sort of Homecoming. Listen to that. I mean, just listen to Mullen's drumming, man. It's so powerful. Yet really adds to that whole song is atmosphere, and it really adds to that atmosphere. It's kind of interesting. The song Elvis Presley and America on this same album on the other the other side is Mullen's drum drum part from uh, Sort of Homecoming slowed down. I don't remember if it's backwards too. I don't remember if it's in reverse. It's Brian Eno and Daniel Lenoir were playing around with it, so it's kind of interesting. I think they took because again, I mean, so much atmosphere in that drumming. So my number 10, Larry Mullen Jr. My number 9 is one that you see on everybody's list, but I mean, for damn good reason. Mitch Mitchell, best known as part of the Experience, Jimi Hendrix Experience. Um, and after the experience broke up, really continued to play with Jimmy and was really, you know, part of Jimmy's plans for his next stage in his career when he died. But yeah, Mitch Mitchell. I mean, just powerhouse. I mean, the fact that Mitch Mitchell sometimes sort of keeps pace with Hendrix, who was a genius, obviously, in these songs, and is doing sometimes just as interesting things on the drum. I mean, there's a reason Hendrix, had Mitch Mitchell in the experience, but then wanted to keep working with him after the experience broke up. So there's a lot of songs I could pick, but I guess my example would be Fire from the debut. I mean, that drum part's right up front, right in your face, and it's actually it's really the focus of the song. I mean, instrumentally, even more than Hendrix is playing or Noel Redding. It's Mitch Mitchell's drums is that's like the hook of the song. So yeah, Fire. Number 8 is a guy who, for people who know music, really respect the hell out of this guy's drumming. Although a lot of his, you know, I guess solo hits as a singer, especially the ballads and all that, kind of sully the reputation a little bit. Although he's kind of had a resurgence, I think, in his overall reputation. But even with all of that, maybe some of the cheesy music he put out as a solo artist, no one, I think, questions his great drumming. And of course, he started out drumming in progressive rock as the drummer for Genesis. Then started, when Peter Gabriel left, took over dual, duties of drums and vocals, and then of course had his solo career. Talking about Phil Collins, obviously, and he's got a he's got a list pages and pages long of other people's, you know sessions that he worked on. I mean, Collins shows up on Peter Gabriel solo, albums, some of them, and Eric Clapton's solo work, and I mean, just Phil Collins, he was like everywhere in the 80s, right? And on the drum kit. So if I'm picking a tune, I mean, I could pick some of those really complex, amazing drum parts in the Genesis, progressive rock stuff. But for me personally, what really, I don't know, excites me, I'm going with I Don't Care Anymore from his second solo album. Not a real complex drum part, but obviously that whole song is built around his like in your face aggressive drums. Such an angry song, and the drums are there, you know, sort of doubling the angry vocal part. It's just awesome. I mean, yes, there is the drum fill of In the Air Tonight. I could go with that, but no, I'm going with I Don't Care Anymore off his second solo album. Love that drum. It's just like, man, awesome. All right, number 7, Mr. Reliable. I mean, like the steadiest drummer. I'm not talking about Ringo. I'm talking about from the other greatest band ever, right? Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones. Charlie Watts. Rarely flashy, always in the pocket, always just rock steady, whatever you need to do. And he actually could do really complex things. Some of his side gigs, he played jazz stuff. He was a jazz drummer on the side, so he could do more complex stuff. But what's cool about Charlie was he never did more than was necessary, and so there's left a lot of great space, for you know everybody else in the band. I mean, I guess I could go with Honky Tonk Woman, but no, I love that opening drum part, and then really throughout the whole song. I probably air drum to this song more than any other song. Is "Get Off My Cloud," right? From, well, in the U.S. it was released on December's Children, but yeah, "Get Off My Cloud." Love that drum part. All right, number 6. Number 6, leave On Helm of the band. And again, in this one, you cannot separate Levon Helm from Rick Danko on bass. That rhythm section together, like an earthiest, soulful, rhythm section you'll ever hear. Yeah, leave on Helm. And Levon could kind of slither all around the beat. I mean, kind of play a little bit behind and usually not ahead. He kind of lay back a little bit, and it just, I don't know, made it groovy, you know. And even when he's doing simple things, and I always admire a drummer who can sing at the same time, like Phil Collins. But Levon Helm, he could sing and play drums. It's pretty awesome. I'm picking a tune. I've always loved the kind of that funky, earthy drum beat on across. Oh no, actually, no, up on Cripple Creek. I mean, I guess you could put across the Great Divide too, but no, up on Cripple Creek from the second record is the one I was thinking about. That'd be a good example there. All right, number 5 is on everyone's list. Needs to be. People talked about how he used, tree trunks for drumsticks. Just the most massive cavernous sound, but he could actually do a lot of things. John Bonham, Led Zeppelin. I mean, what do you say? What am I going to pick? It's an obvious choice, but it's probably one of the most effective drum beats ever. It's been sampled a billion times, but When the Levee Breaks, right, from Led Zeppelin 4. Just that cavernous, just it's like Rocky Mountains of drums, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I remember reading how they got that sound. They recorded this album in that huge house, and I think they had him in this sort of, I don't know, downstairs or something, and like they recorded the drums just like echoing through the stairwells, and they got this huge sound, huge sound. All right, number 4. I'm going with a notorious individual as far as personality goes. From everything you read, very hard to get along with, but brilliant, brilliant on drums. Ginger Baker, primarily from Cream, but he did a lot of other stuff too. And in fact, it's kind of interesting. Ginger Baker, he'd always, people bring up Cream, and he's like, I did a lot more than Cream. It was a lot better than Cream, but we still listen to Cream, right? So I'm going to pick something from Cream. White Room. I go with White Room from Wheels of Fire. And what's great about White Room, and with Cream in general, it's I mean, Eric Clapton, it's a trio featuring Eric Clapton, where Eric Clapton may be the third most talented guy in that band, behind Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce, of course. And listen to White Room, and yeah, it's got that great, wah wah effect, with Clapton on the solos and everything, the great vocal from Jack Bruce. But like, listen to that song and focus on what Baker is doing. There's like just as much character and personality as Eric Clapton on the guitar with the wah pedal and everything else. He's just doing it on drums. I mean, it's like counterpoint almost. It's like commenting on the music. It's not just a drum beat. And you listen to live Cream stuff like Spoonful on here, for instance, or Crossroads. Like, Baker could just go nuts in the live setting too. Just, yeah, amazing. All right, my number 3. Now, my number 3, I don't know. You hear people talk about him a lot. I've also heard from drummers who are kind of critical of this guy. Sometimes he had trouble keeping a basic beat down, but he was, I think, one of these, I don't know, mad geniuses, and kind of like Ginger Baker, although Ginger Baker, I think, was more technically skilled than this guy. But this guy also had so much character and personality in his drums. Talk about Keith Moon of The Who. And I don't know, you listen to the whole Tommy record. In the studio, I think that might be Keith Moon's peak. It's listen to his drumming on the whole Tommy record. I actually didn't pull it off the shelf because that's not my example, though. My example really with Keith Moon when he's really on in the live setting. And so I'm going with something off Live at Leeds. Let's just take Young Man Blues. I mean, just just listen to it's like a steam engine, and it's Keith Moon driving that stuff, and it's just it's Keith Moon is what makes the Who. I mean, yeah, John Entwistle is well. Look at where I put Entwistle on my bass list, but John Entwistle, is the virtuoso. Townsend, sort of the creative genius, and Daltrey, a great frontman. But Keith Moon was the wild card, and not just personality and craziness, but musically, especially live. I mean, never knew Keith would take you over that edge, but man, it was exciting. Yeah, and I was reading a quote somewhere. Some critic said about Young Man Blues, which is the song I picked. Is it's total anarchy, and he's talking about Keith Moon's drumming. Total anarchy, or goes from total anarchy to a dead stop over and over. I know if you know that song, it's a cover song actually of a Mose Allison song, but they of course make it like a heavy metal song almost. And Moon is just like just bulldozing through, and then stops on a dime, and then boom, and then stops, and over and over, because how the verses go and all that. Man, it's just remarkable stuff. My top two, though, like for me, so all these others are maybe here, and my top, there's a ton of space for me, and my top two are like clearly in my top two. It's not even close. These two drummers are the two that just get me excited when they're playing. Like I am often focusing on what they're doing. But my number two is Bill Bruford, right? Uh, Played on much of Yes's most important work in the early '70s, and then of course huge long stint with King Crimson. And for fun, also played on a Genesis live album. So you can say Bill Bruford played, with sort of the Holy Trinity, right? Yes, Genesis, King Crimson. Man, I mean, I could pick a ton of, for an example of Bruford, I could pick a ton of stuff. But I've told y'all over and over, I really dig that '80s lineup of King Crimson, the quartet, Robert Fripp, Adrian Belew, Tony Levin, and Bruford. And of course, almost anything off of Discipline. Take the title track, Discipline, or the song Indiscipline, where he's just going nuts. Indiscipline's amazing. But Discipline's amazing too. Discipline is. I was reading about that song today when I was kind of prepping this. Such a complex. All four of those guys are doing incredibly complex things in that song. But Bruford, from what I was reading, the rhythm is 16/17ths, so 16/17 rhythm. But then his bass drum is keeping a 4/4. So imagine doing 16/17 and then 4/4, with Fripp and Belew and Levin each doing their own different rhythms. It's insane. It's insane. God, Bill Bruford. Like I'll tell you this, like I really like well, I guess they're kind of done now too, but the most recent lineup at Crimson had three incredible drummers. They had a three drummer lineup, but Bruford alone was more interesting than all three of those guys playing together. It's just, I don't know, it's insane. Those of you who've been watching my channel should not be surprised at my number one pick at all. So without further ado, you know who this is going to be. Stuart Copeland of the Police. I just, what that guy does, not even with the primary drums, but like the hi-hat and the cymbals and like all the other things. I mean, less a drummer and a percussionist. I mean, just all these other things. A drummer that is immediately identifiable. My favorite example is you listen to Peter Gabriel's Red Rain, the song that opens so. And the, the first thing you hear really is this hi-hat, this hi-hat on that song. And immediately he's like, that's Stuart Copeland. And it is. What's funny is Stuart Copeland doesn't play the drums on that song. Peter Gabriel got Stuart Copeland just to come in and play the hi-hat. Because no one has that sound. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. If I'm going to pick something, for me, this is, at least if you're looking at Police, the Police material, because Copeland's done a lot of stuff outside the Police. Played with a lot of jazz stuff, done a lot of soundtrack work, all kinds of stuff. But if you're looking at Police work, which is what he's primarily known for, I think the second Police record, Regatta de Blanc, is probably his best drumming record. Um, for me, it's a toss-up. I go with the title track, Regatta de Blanc. Listen to what he does in that song. Or Walking on the Moon, if you really want to hear the hi-hat stuff. And just how he, just kind of alters the rhythm and does it. Oh, man, it's just, and fills that space. Yeah. Stuart Copeland's the man for me. All right. Honorable mentions. Mick Fleetwood, Fleetwood Mac, of course. Well, all right. I've always said Neil Peart. I know it's Neil. How do you say it? Neil Peart. I know there's a proper way to pronounce it. Neil Peart, Rush. I mean, yeah. If you want to talk about technique, I mean, obviously he's going to be up there with the best of everybody. Billy Cobham. If we're going to talk about getting some jazz musicians, he played with Miles, Mahavishnu Orchestra. That guy is on another planet. Jim Keltner, great session guy. You gotta listen to Keltner stuff. Jack DeJohnette, also, kind of jazz fusion guy, played with Miles Davis as well. Terry Bozzio, great session guy. I love Bozzio's work on some of Jeff Beck's albums. Just amazing. Got to see him. When I saw Jeff Beck in 1989, it was with Tony Hymas on keyboards and Terry Bozzio on drums. So they were a trio. That was intense. Yeah, I got to give a shout out to Ringo Starr, right? I mean, I don't know. It's a cliche to say he's underrated, so maybe he's not even underrated anymore because everyone talks about how underrated he is. So everyone knows he's underrated, so he's not really underrated. Jeff Porcaro, consummate session guy, of course, played with Toto. There's a great. You go on YouTube. Here we are on YouTube, but you're on YouTube. There's a great video somewhere where it isolates his drum part in Africa. The Toto song. It's so cool. Or is it Africa or is it one of the other ones? I don't know, but you can find some isolated drum parts for Porcaro, Jeff Porcaro's work with Toto. Man, that guy's awesome. Anyway, there you go. There's my drum video. So you guys like I said, tell me in the comments, who did I leave out? Who's awesome? Who do you like? Let's talk drummers. Please do subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content. We really, really do appreciate it. It helps us do what we want to do. Like the videos, hit the bell for notifications, all that great stuff. And we'll see you next time.